The air in the gilded glass was always thick, not with smoke, it wasn't allowed, but with the smell of expensive perfume, polished wood, and the faint, sweet sharpness of top-shelf liquor. It was a place of low lights, softer laughs, and the quiet clink of crystal. Alara moved through it like a shadow in her plain black dress and apron. A tray balanced on her upturned palm. Her feet, in their sensible black shoes, had long since passed the point of aching and settled into a constant, dull protest. She knew every groove in the dark hardwood floor, every table that wobbled slightly, every customer who liked their drink refilled the moment the ice touched bottom. She weaved between the plush chairs and the suits and the elegant dresses. A ghost in the machine of the evening, not her eyes, however, kept drifting to the corner of the room. On a small raised stage of dark oak, under a single muted spotlight, sat the piano. It was a grand Steinway, a beast of gleaming black lacquer. To most of the people here, it was just part of the furniture, a classy decoration. To Alara, it was a sleeping giant. Sometimes on Tuesday afternoons before the lounge opened, the cleaning staff would leave the lid unlocked. She would sneak a moment, just a minute, to press a single key. The note would hang in the empty room, pure and full, a secret between her and the instrument. That felt like a lifetime ago. Now the piano just sat there, silent. The featured performer for the night, a jazz pianist with a minor radio hit, had called in sick at the last minute. You could feel the gap his absence left. The careful background music of the evening had a hole in it. Conversations had to work harder. The manager, a man with a permanently tense jaw, was pacing near the bar, his phone glued to his ear, his voice a low, angry hiss. No, I understand. But it's Friday night. The place is full. This looks terrible. Alara delivered a gin and tonic to table 6, a pair of business types talking in serious numbers. She smiled without it touching her eyes, the way she'd been trained. Can I get you anything else? They waved her off without looking up. She was already forgotten, a moving part in the scenery. She glanced back at the piano. Her fingers, curled around her empty tray, twitched. It was a strange, automatic movement, like they were remembering something her mind was trying to forget. She walked back to the service station, the swinging door to the kitchen muffling the sound of clattering pans. Another waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders, was filling a water pitcher. Manager's about to blow a gasket, the woman said, nodding towards the front. The piano guy didn't show? Alara asked, though she already knew. Nope. Makes the whole place feel cheap, you know? Like we didn't plan properly. Alara looked through the round window in the kitchen door. She could see the curve of the Steinway. She remembered her grandmother's upright piano, crammed into their small living room. The keys were yellowed, and some of them stuck, but her grandmother had shown her how to make them sing. She'd spent hours there, through her teenage years, while her friends were out doing other things. The piano was her world. Then life happened. College was expensive. Her grandmother got sick. The dream of music school, of stages, of any of that, got packed away in a box labeled, maybe someday. The piano became a memory, and her hands learned new skills, balancing trays, polishing glasses, calculating bills. A burst of laughter came from a large table near the stage. A group of well-dressed people, clearly celebrating something. One of them, a woman in a sparkling dress, gestured at the empty piano bench and said something that made her friends laugh louder. The sound was jarring. It wasn't mean laughter, not exactly. It was the sound of people for whom the empty stage was a mild inconvenience, a joke. To Alara, it felt like someone laughing in a library or a church. That silent piano wasn't a joke. It was a tragedy. Her break was in 5 minutes. She usually spent it in the tiny staff room, sitting on a plastic chair and staring at the wall. Tonight, the thought of that made her skin feel tight. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands trembling just a little. The tremor wasn't from fear, not yet. It was from a strange, rising energy, like a current waking up in a wire that had been cold for years. She pushed through the door again, into the lounge. The manager was now off the phone, standing with his arms crossed, staring at the empty stage as if his anger could summon a musician. He looked defeated. Ilara's path took her right past him to pick up an order from the bar. As she passed, she heard him mutter to the bartender, "We look like amateurs. I should just put a closed for maintenance sign on the darn thing." The words came out of her mouth before her brain could catch them. They were soft, barely more than a breath, directed at the floor. "I could play." For a second, nothing happened. She thought maybe she hadn't actually spoken. Then she saw his polished shoes turn toward her. She looked up. He was staring at her, his eyebrows knitted together in pure confusion. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like he'd just heard the cat speak. "What did you say?" Ilara's throat went dry. She tightened her grip on her tray, the edge biting into her palm. "I said I could play. The piano. Just to fill the time. Until you find someone else." She wished the floor would swallow her. He blinked. He looked her up and down, taking in the apron, the sensible shoes, the tired face of a waitress at the end of a long shift. A small, almost pitying smile touched his lips. "Ilara, come on. That's a very expensive instrument. And these people," he gestured vaguely at the room, "they have certain expectations. I appreciate the team spirit, really. But it's not that simple." The dismissal was gentle, which somehow made it worse. He was patting her on the head. She felt her face grow hot. She was about to mutter an apology and flee when a new voice entered the conversation. "What seems to be the trouble, Mark?" An older gentleman from the corner table had approached. Ilara knew him. He was a regular, always alone, always nursing a single scotch while he read a book or just watched the room. He had a kind, weathered face and quiet eyes that noticed things. The manager, Mark, immediately put on his professional smile. "No trouble, Mr. Alden. Just a little hiccup with the entertainment tonight." "The silence is the hiccup," Mr. Alden said calmly. His eyes shifted from the manager to Ilara. He'd heard the exchange. She could see it in his thoughtful gaze. "Did I hear this young lady offer to play?" Mark's smile tightened. "Well, yes, she was just trying to be helpful. But you know, we have a standard to maintain here. The standard right now is an empty stool and a talking crowd," Mr. Alden interrupted, not unkindly. He looked at Ilara again. "Do you play often?" Ilara's voice was a whisper. "I used to. A long time ago." Mr. Alden studied her face for a long moment. He seemed to be looking for something behind her eyes, past the nervousness and the uniform. He nodded slowly, as if he'd found it. He turned back to the manager. "Mark, let the girl play. The worst that happens is the background noise continues, but with a little melody. The best that happens, well, we get some music. I'd call that an improvement." The manager was trapped. Mr. Alden was a valued customer, a man whose opinion carried quiet weight. Arguing with him would be worse than letting a waitress make a fool of herself for 15 minutes. He let out a long, slow sigh, the sound of a man surrendering to a bizarre fate. He looked at Ilara, his expression serious. One piece, something. Quiet, classical, no show tunes. And for God's sake, be careful with the piano. It was less permission, and more a statement of terms for a disaster he now had to manage. Ilara's heart was hammering so hard she was sure they could see it beating through her dress. She just nodded, unable to speak. The tray in her hands felt suddenly ridiculous. She turned and walked on unsteady legs toward the service station. She didn't go to the staff room. She simply set the tray down on the counter, her movements slow and deliberate. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it next to the tray. She didn't look at anyone. Then she turned and walked back through the lounge. She didn't look at the manager or at Mr. Alden, who had returned to his seat, watching her with quiet interest. She didn't look at the table of laughing friends. She kept her eyes on the piano, that dark, silent giant on the stage. The walk felt miles long. Every step was a decision. The chatter of the room seemed to fade into a distant hum. She reached the steps to the stage. For a second, she paused, her hand on the smooth oak railing. This was the line. On this side, she was Alara, the waitress. On the other side, under that light, she would be something else. Or she would be a laughingstock. There was no way to know. She took the last step up. The spotlight, though dim, felt hot on her skin. The piano was bigger up close, more real. She could see the perfect, dustless sheen of its lid. She walked to the bench, a simple, polished seat. She didn't adjust the height. She just sat down, her back straight. The black and white keys stretched out before her, an endless landscape. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, looking down at them. They were good hands for a waitress, strong, capable, a little dry from washing. She wondered if they remembered what to do. She took a deep, silent breath, filling her lungs. Then she lifted her hands and placed them gently on the cool, smooth ivory of the keys. The contact sent a jolt through her, a shock of memory and feeling. The giant was awake. And so, finally, was she. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the world inside the gilded glass changed. It wasn't a sudden silence. It was a slow settling, like dust in a sunbeam after a door is closed. The conversations didn't stop all at once. They faded, one by one, as people noticed the figure on the stage. A waitress was sitting at the piano. That was the first thing they saw. Her plain black dress against the polished black of the Steinway. Some faces showed mild curiosity. A few at the bar table, the ones who had laughed earlier, exchanged amused glances. What was this? A staff party trick? The manager must be really desperate. Alara didn't see any of it. The room had shrunk to the space between her hands and the keyboard. The lights, the perfumed air, the weight of all those eyes, it all melted into a blur at the edges of her vision. The only thing in sharp focus was the geometry of black and white. Her heart, which had been pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, began to slow. Its beat changed, finding a new, deeper tempo. This was a different kind of fear. Not the fear of being seen, but the fear of not being able to say what she needed to say. She closed her eyes for just a second. In the darkness behind her lids, she wasn't in a cocktail lounge. She was in a small living room, with the smell of old books and lemon polish. Her grandmother's voice was there, not as a sound, but as a feeling. Play the story, not just the notes. What story did she have to tell tonight? It wasn't a happy one. It was a story of long hours and quiet dreams, of melodies played for an audience of none in a silent apartment. It was a story of missing someone who had believed in her. It was heavy and sad, but there was a thread of fight in it too. A stubborn refusal to let the music die completely. Her hands decided. They moved to a familiar starting position, a place on the keyboard they knew from 1,000 lonely repetitions. The piece was Chopin's Ballade. It was a mountain of a composition, not something you played as quiet background music. But it was the story in her heart. She couldn't play anything else. She took one last breath, held it, and began. The first few notes were soft, a gentle questioning. A simple melody rose from the bass, unhurried and thoughtful. It was the sound of remembering. The few people who were still talking quieted down, not out of politeness, but because the sound demanded it. This wasn't tinkling cocktail jazz. This was something that came from a different, deeper place. At the service station, the other waitress stopped wiping a glass. She just stood, holding the towel, her head tilted. The bartender paused, a bottle in mid-pour. The manager, Mark, stood rigid by the host's stand, his arms still crossed, but his defiant posture was gone. He just watched, his mouth slightly open. Ilara's body began to move with the music. Her shoulders, usually tense from carrying trays, relaxed into a fluid motion. Her back was straight, but not stiff. She leaned into the phrases, her head giving a slight, unconscious nod as the left hand established a rolling, wave-like rhythm. The music began to build. The gentle, questioning melody grew stronger, more insistent. It swelled with a bittersweet longing that filled the room, pushing against the walls, replacing the smell of whiskey with something intangible and electric. Mr. Alden, the old regular, set his book down carefully on the table. He didn't pick up his scotch. He simply placed both hands flat on the tablecloth, as if to steady himself. A profound recognition dawned in his eyes. This was no party trick. This was mastery. The technique was there, the clear, singing tone, the perfect control of the pedals, but it was the feeling behind it that hit him in the chest. He had heard this piece played in great concert halls by famous names. This had the same raw truth. At the laughing table, the woman in the sparkling dress had stopped smiling. Her playful elbow nudging of her friend ceased. She was just listening, her eyes fixed on the woman on stage. The waitress was gone. In her place was a person completely transformed, lost in a private world that she was letting them all visit. The music was pulling them in, making their earlier laughter feel cheap and small. Ilara didn't know any of this. She was riding the wave of the music. The stormy middle section was approaching. Her fingers, strong from years of unglamorous work, found a power that surprised even her. The gentle waves became crashing torrents. The music turned dark, furious, a turbulent storm of sound. She attacked the keys, not with anger, but with a fierce, controlled passion. This was the fight in the story. The struggle against the quiet life, against the settling dust, against the acceptance of invisibility. The sound was glorious and huge. It wasn't loud in a crashing, ugly way. It was full, rich, and complex, every note clear even in the furious passages. A man at the bar, who had been checking his phone, slowly put the device down on the counter, screen side down. He didn't want the light to intrude. The storm reached its peak, a cascade of notes tumbling over one another like rocks in a flood. And then, as suddenly as it had exploded, it broke. The music fell back into a fragile, heartbreakingly beautiful version of the original melody. It was the memory after the rage, softer now, and infinitely sad. This was where Ilara felt a tightness in her throat. This was the missing. This was the empty chair in the living room. Her playing became tender, so soft that the room leaned forward to hear. You could have heard a piece of ice melt in a glass dot in that quiet, a single clear note rang out, perfectly held. A sigh seemed to pass through the audience. Then the finale began. Chopin's Coda, one of the most terrifying and exciting passages in all of piano music. It was a whirlwind, a relentless gallop toward the edge of a cliff. Ilara's hands became a blur, flying across the keyboard with an accuracy that was born of muscle memory and pure feeling. There was no thought, only motion. The music was a runaway horse, and she was clinging on, guiding it with every ounce of her skill and heart. The tension in the room was physical. People were holding their breath. The manager had taken an unconscious step forward, his hand on the back of a chair. It built and built, faster and louder, a furious, magnificent race to the end. And then, with two final, thunderous chords. It was over. The last note hung in the air, vibrating in the strings of the great piano, vibrating in the bones of everyone listening. Then, silence. A total, profound, and heavy silence. It wasn't the awkward silence from before the manager had been pacing. This was a silence of awe, of being collectively struck by something beautiful and unexpected. It was a silence that needed to be respected. Eiler's hands dropped into her lap. She was shaking. She felt emptied out. Every emotion poured into the keyboard. She was back in the room now, the spotlight hot on her neck. She was afraid to move, afraid to break the spell and see the reality of confused or polite faces dot at his corner table. Mr. Alden blinked slowly. He looked around the room, seeing the frozen postures, the stunned faces. He understood what he had just witnessed was not just musical skill. It was a soul speaking, and it had been heard. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed his chair back. The sound of the wood scraping the floor was tiny in the vast quiet. He stood up. He didn't clap right away. He simply stood there, a solemn, respectful figure. Then he brought his hands together. The single, sharp clap echoed like a gunshot dot. It broke the stillness dot at the table with the sparkling dress. The woman stood up next, her eyes bright. Then her friend. Then the whole table. At the bar, the man who had put his phone down rose to his feet. The bartender, forgetting he was behind the counter, stepped out and started clapping. The other waitress was openly wiping tears from her cheeks as she stood by the service station. One by one, then in groups, then as one whole, the entire crowd in the gilded glass rose. They stood beside their tables, their chairs scraping, their drinks forgotten. There was no cheering, not at first. It was a wave of sustained, thunderous, heartfelt applause. It was the sound of people not just appreciating a performance, but bearing witness to a moment of real, raw truth. Ilara finally lifted her head. The sight made her breath catch. They were all standing. All of them. The smiling ones, the serious ones. The manager, every single person was on their feet, looking at her, their hands moving together in a storm of noise. The weight of their attention was immense, but it wasn't the crushing weight of being a waitress judged for a spilled drink. It was the buoyant, terrifying weight of being seen. A small, stunned sound escaped her lips, lost in the applause. She didn't know what to do, so she did the only thing that felt right. She stood up from the piano bench, her legs wobbly. She turned to face the room, and with the instinct she didn't know she had, she gave a small, humble bow of her head. The applause swelled. Louder, warmer. Mr. Alden was still clapping. A firm, steady rhythm, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. He had been right. The silence had been worse than a risk, and the risk had turned into something he would remember for the rest of his days. The applause washed over her like a warm wave, loud and solid. It was a physical thing, pushing the air around the room. Ilara stood by the piano bench, her hands pressed flat against the black fabric of her dress. She could feel the vibration of the clapping in the floorboards under her sensible shoes. Her face was hot. A part of her brain, the part that was still just a waitress, screamed that this was wrong, that she needed to grab a tray and get back to work. But the sight held her frozen. The whole room was on its feet. The man at the bar was whistling sharply through his fingers. The woman in the sparkling dress had tears shining on her cheeks as she clapped. It was the manager's face that truly shocked her. He wasn't clapping with wild enthusiasm, but he was clapping, a slow, dazed rhythm, and he was looking right at her with an expression she'd never seen before. It wasn't a manager's look. It was pure, stunned confusion, mixed with something like respect. The old regular, Mr. Alden, was the first to move forward. He weaved through the standing crowd with a quiet purpose, not rushing, but not wasting time. He stepped up onto the small stage. The applause began to die down, shifting into a murmur of excited conversation as people slowly, reluctantly, started to sit back down. The spell was breaking, but the energy in the room had changed completely. It was buzzing. He stopped in front of her. Up close, his eyes were a pale, watery blue, but they were sharp. They looked at her, really looked, past the uniform and the shaking hands. "My dear," he said. His voice was low, meant just for her, but it carried a weight that silenced the last of the chatter nearby. People were watching, pretending not to. "What is your name?" "Elara," she whispered. Her own voice sounded strange to her. "Elara," he repeated, as if testing the sound. He nodded. "My name is Thomas. Thomas Alden." He didn't offer a hand to shake. He just looked at her, his head tilted. "Where did you study?" The question was like a splash of cold water. It brought the real world crashing back. I didn't," she said, her voice gaining a little strength, but colored with shame. "Not formally. My grandmother taught me. I was going to apply to the conservatory, but it didn't work out." She glanced down at her hands, the waitress's hands. He followed her gaze, then looked back at her face. "That," he said, gesturing with his chin towards the piano, "was not the playing of someone who didn't work out. That was the playing of an artist who has been working very hard, all alone, for a long time." His words were so simple, so direct, they cut through everything. Her eyes suddenly stung. She blinked hard, looking away across the room. She saw the other waitress giving her a frantic, thrilled thumbs up from behind the service station. "Do you have a card?" Mr. Alden asked. "Some way I can contact you?" She almost laughed, a choked, desperate sound. No. I don't have cards." "A phone number, then." It wasn't a request. It was a gentle instruction. He pulled out a small, elegant leather notebook and a pen from his jacket pocket. He held them out to her Dot. Her fingers were still trembling. She took the pen and notebook. The paper was thick and creamy. She wrote her number down, her handwriting looking childish and messy on the fine paper. She handed it back. He tore out the page carefully, then took a different, crisp white card from his own wallet and handed it to her. "This is me. Please, call me tomorrow. Not too early." He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I have some people you should meet." Before she could even process what he meant, the manager was there. He hovered at the edge of the stage, looking unsure of how to proceed. "Elara," he said, his voice oddly formal. "That was unexpected." Mr. Alden turned to him. "Mark, you have been hiding a national treasure in your waitstaff. You should give her a raise. And a new job title." He said it lightly, but there was a steel underneath. The manager, Mark, flushed. "Yes, well, it was certainly impressive." He looked at Elara, struggling. The dynamic between them had shattered. He could no longer be her boss in the old way. Not after that. "Why don't you? Take the rest of the night off?" "You've certainly earned it. Take the night off." It was a dismissal, but a privileged one. Usually, leaving early meant lost tips, a mark against you. This felt different. "Go on," Mr. Alden said softly to her. "Get your things. Let it settle." Numbly, Elara nodded. She walked off the stage, the eyes of the room following her. As she passed the table of the woman in the sparkling dress, the woman reached out and gently touched her arm. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she said, her voice earnest. "Thank you." Elara could only manage a nod and a weak smile. The walk to the service station felt longer than the walk to the stage had. Her coworker, the older waitress, grabbed her the moment she came through the door. "Oh, honey," she breathed, pulling her into a quick, hard hug. I had no idea. You were like a movie. You should have seen their faces. Thanks, Rita, Elara mumbled into her shoulder. She felt like she might cry if she wasn't careful. She retrieved her apron from the counter. It felt like a costume from another life. She folded it and put it in her small, warm locker. She took out her ordinary coat, a thin, practical thing. Slipping it on over her black dress felt absurd. She was putting a shell back on over something that had cracked open. When she pushed back out into the lounge, the atmosphere had returned to a hum of conversation, but it was all about her. She could hear snippets as she hurried towards the staff exit at the back. Unbelievable. Right here, serving my drink. The look on Mark's face, priceless. Like something out of a fairy tale. She pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the alley behind the gilded glass. The night air was cool and damp, a shock after the warm, perfumed interior. It smelled of wet pavement and garbage from the bins. The real world. The glorious noise was gone, replaced by the distant rumble of the city. She leaned against the rough brick wall, letting it hold her up. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Her whole body was buzzing, but it was a tired buzz now, like the last vibration of a plucked string. She looked down at the business card in her hand. In simple, elegant type it said, Thomas Alden, music critic, retired, and a phone number, .music critic. A retired music critic. He hadn't just been a nice old man. He had been, for decades, a professional listener, a judge of talent. And he had stood up first. The door creaked open again. It was the manager, Mark. He stood there awkwardly, his hands in his pockets. Listen, he started, not meeting her eyes. About what happened in there. It was good. Really good. You saved the night. He cleared his throat. Mr. Alden? He's a big deal. Or he was. People listened to him. He finally looked at her. If he calls you about something, you'll let me know, right? Maybe we could talk about you playing here, officially, on the schedule. It was an offer. A real one. Not out of pure generosity, she knew. He'd seen the reaction. He was a businessman. But it was an offer she'd never dreamed of getting an hour ago. I'll let you know, she said, her voice quiet but steady. He nodded, looking relieved. Okay, good. Get home safe. He went back inside. Alone again, Elara pushed off from the wall and started the walk to the bus stop. The city lights blurred around her. She kept opening and closing the hand that wasn't holding the card, feeling the memory of the keys. The crushing weight of the ordinary night was gone. In its place was a terrifying, thrilling emptiness. A blank space. For years, her path had been a narrow, predictable alley work, home, sleep, repeat. The wall at the end of that alley had just fallen down. Now there was a vast, open field in front of her, lit by strange stars, and she had no map. She felt incredibly light and incredibly lost. She got on the nearly empty bus. An old man at the front gave her a tired glance, then went back to staring out the window. She was invisible again, but she didn't feel invisible. She felt like she had a secret, a glowing coal in her chest. The card in her hand was proof. The memory of the standing crowd was proof. She got off at her stop and walked to her small apartment building. Inside, it was quiet and dark. She didn't turn on the main light. She went straight to the little keyboard she kept in the corner, a cheap electric thing with headphones. She sat on the stool and just looked at it. Then she placed her fingers on the plastic keys. They felt dead and tinny after the glorious resonance of the Steinway, but she pressed a chord. The sound that came out of the small speaker was thin and pathetic. A laugh burst out of her, a real laugh, full of disbelief and joy and exhaustion. She had played a masterpiece on one of the finest pianos in the city for a room full of people who who gave her a standing ovation. And now she was home, sitting in the dark with a $50 keyboard. The absurdity of it broke the last of the tension. She put her head in her hands and just breathed. Tomorrow, she would call Mr. Alden. Tomorrow, everything might change. Or it might not. But tonight, for the first time in a very, very long time, the silence in her apartment didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the quiet after a first wonderful word has been spoken. It felt like a beginning waiting to happen. She just had to find the courage to speak again. The morning light through her thin curtains felt different. It wasn't just the gray light of another day off. It felt sharper, like it was illuminating dust motes that were actually tiny, spinning possibilities. Alara lay in bed for a long time, watching them dance. The high from the night before had faded, leaving behind a deep, quiet hum in her bones and a knot of nerves in her stomach. She made tea, her movements slow. The business card from Mr. Alden sat on her small kitchen table like a sleeping animal. She waited until the clock read a respectable 10 a.m. before picking up her phone. Her thumb hovered over the number. What would she even say? Asterisk hello, you told a waitress to call you? Asterisk, she took a breath and pressed dial. He answered on the second ring. Thomas Alden? Mr. Alden? Hello, it's Alara, from the Gilded Glass last night. His voice warmed immediately. Alara, I was hoping you'd call. Tell me, how are you feeling this morning? It must have been quite a shock to your system. The simple question disarmed her. I'm okay. A little overwhelmed, I think. I should think so, he said, a gentle humor in his tone. Now listen. I don't believe in wasting time, and at my age, I don't have much to waste. I've already made 2 calls this morning. The first was to an old friend who teaches at the city conservatory. Not as a professor, mind you, but he runs a community outreach program. He has a practice room with a decent piano he can make available, and more importantly, he has ears that matter. He's expecting you at 3 o'clock today. Alara's grip tightened on the phone. Today? Today, he said firmly. The second call was to the conductor of the Community Symphony Orchestra. She's a good sort, always looking for fresh talent for their soloist competitions. She's agreed to meet you for coffee tomorrow morning at 9. I'll text you the addresses. It was too much, too fast. The blank field from last night was suddenly being filled with signposts, and it was terrifying. Mr. Alden, I'm not sure I'm ready for a symphony audition. I've been playing alone. That, he said, his voice soft but unyielding, was abundantly clear. And what I heard last night was not someone who needs 10 more years of solitary practice. It was someone who needs to play for people, who needs to be heard. The ready part is irrelevant. You are. You just are. The question is, do you want to walk through the doors that are opening? She looked around her quiet, shabby apartment. She looked at the cheap keyboard. She thought of the weightlessness of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Yes, she said, and the word felt solid. I do. Good girl, he said, and it didn't sound condescending. It sounded proud. Now, go to the conservatory at 3. Just play for my friend. Don't try to impress him. Just play like you did last night. The rest will follow. The rest of the day was a strange blur. She tried to eat. She tried to practice on her keyboard, but it felt pointless. At 2:30, she put on her one nice outfit, a simple, dark blue dress that wasn't a waitress uniform, and took the bus across town. The conservatory building was an old stone fortress of music. Students with instrument cases hurried through grand archways. The sound of a dozen different instruments being practiced leaked from windows and doors, a chaotic, beautiful symphony of work. She felt like an imposter walking through the main doors. She found the room number Mr. Alden had given her, a small rehearsal room on the 4th floor. Inside, a man was waiting. He was younger than Mr. Alden, with kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses and a comfortable sweater. He stood up and smiled as she entered. "You must be Elara. Thomas told me to expect someone special." "I'm David." They shook hands. In the corner of the room was an upright piano, not a glorious Steinway, but it was real. It was 1,000 times better than her keyboard. "Thomas said to let you play," David said, gesturing to the piano. "Don't mind me. I'll just listen." Her nerves were jangling again, but this was a different kind. This wasn't a room of distracted strangers. This was one person whose job was to listen critically. She sat at the piano. It was slightly out of tune, and the action was stiff. She played the same Chopin ballade. It wasn't as fluid as the night before. Her fingers stumbled in a few places, stiff with new anxiety. She finished, feeling a flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck. "I'm sorry. It's a different piano. I'm a bit nervous." David hadn't moved from his chair. He was just watching her, his head tilted. "Elara, do you know what I heard?" he asked. "I heard a musician who knows this piece in her bones, not just her fingers. I heard the story. A few rusty gears? That's nothing. A few weeks of regular practice on a proper instrument, and they'll oil themselves right up." He leaned forward. "What Thomas heard last night? He was right. You have something. It's not taught. It's felt. This room is yours to use, any weekday afternoon. Just sign in at the front, and—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There's a scholarship for adult learners, for people whose paths took a detour. It's not a full ride, but it covers some lessons with faculty. I think you should apply. I'll put the form in your hands." An hour later, she was walking back out into the sunlight, a bundle of papers clutched to her chest and a key code for the rehearsal room in her phone. It was real. It was starting. The next morning, she met the symphony conductor at a small cafe. The conductor was a brisk, energetic woman with a severe gray haircut and a surprisingly warm smile. "Thomas Alden doesn't call me for just anyone," she said, stirring her espresso. "He said you lit up a room of martini drinkers with Chopin. That's a skill." They talked. The conductor asked her about her background, her training, what she loved to play. Then she slid a pamphlet across the table. "Our soloist competition is in 3 months. The winner plays Grieg's Piano Concerto with the orchestra in the fall. It's a big commitment, and the competition is fierce. Mostly conservatory kids, but the application deadline is next week. I'll waive the fee if you promise to give it everything you've got. Grieg, a full concerto, with an orchestra." The idea was so huge it made her dizzy. When she got home, there was a message on her phone from the manager, Mark. "Elara, give me a call when you can. We need to talk about your schedule and about that idea of you playing here on the weekends." She called him back. His tone was all business now, but a respectful business. They worked out a new arrangement. She would work 3 lunch shifts a week, steady money. And on Friday and Saturday nights, she would be the featured performer for 2 sets. The pay for performing was significantly more than waiting tables. "We'll call it a transitional contract," Mark said, sounding pleased with the term. He was already thinking of how to market her, the waitress turned virtuoso. It was cheesy, but it was a job. A real playing the piano job. That night, she sat in her apartment surrounded by the pieces of her new life. The scholarship forms, the competition pamphlet, the new work schedule, the key code to the practice room. It was like a puzzle that had been thrown in the air and was landing in a completely new picture. For so long, her life had been about getting through the shift, getting through the week. Getting through the quiet loneliness of a dream deferred. Now, it was about building. And it was terrifying. The safety of invisibility was gone. Now there would be expectations. There would be judgments from people who knew more than bar patrons. There was a very real chance she would apply for the scholarship and be rejected. She would enter the competition and come in last. She would play her weekend sets, and people would talk through them, and the magic of that first night would never come back. The fear was a cold stone in her gut, but underneath it, like a steady flame, was something else. It was the memory of her hands on the Steinway. It was the sound of that first standing ovation. It was the look in old Mr. Alden's eyes. It was the feeling, for those 7 minutes, of being exactly where she was meant to be. She picked up the competition pamphlet. 3 months. Grieg's Piano Concerto. It was a mountain, but for the first time, she wasn't looking at the mountain from a distance, wishing she could climb. She was standing at the base, with a map in her hand and a pair of strong boots on her feet. She had a path. It was steep, and she might fall. But she was going to start climbing. She walked over to her cheap keyboard, put on her headphones, and found a recording of the concerto on her phone. She listened, her eyes closed, her fingers resting lightly on the silent plastic keys, tracing the phantom shapes of the melodies to come. The waitress was gone. The woman at the base of the mountain was here, and she was ready to begin. The 3 months that followed were not a montage of easy triumphs. They were hard, granular work, the kind that happens in the quiet, in between hours when no one is applauding. Ilara's life became a tightrope walk between two worlds. 3 days a week, she was still at the Gilded Glass for the lunch shift. She wore her black dress and apron, refilled iced teas, and made small talk about the soup of the day. The other waitresses treated her a little differently, now with a curious respect, and sometimes a touch of envy. The customers who recognized her from the viral video would sometimes ask for her section, whispering, "Aren't you the piano girl?" She would nod, smile, and take their order, happy for the slightly larger tip. The other world was the world of music, and it was ruthlessly demanding. Her afternoons belonged to the small, slightly stuffy practice room at the conservatory. The upright piano became her battlefield. The scholarship application was a mountain of paperwork and personal essays that made her dig up old dreams and dust them off, exposing their tender undersides. David, the outreach teacher, became a sort of guide. He didn't give her formal lessons, but he would pop in, listen for 10 minutes, and offer a single, precise piece of advice. The left hand is dragging there. Think of it as a heartbeat, not a march. Or, you're rushing to the beautiful part. Make us wait for it. Savor the tension. The Grieg concerto was a beast. It was orchestrally huge, and reducing it to 2 hands on a piano felt like trying to hold back the ocean. For the first 2 weeks, she felt hopeless. The runs of notes were dizzying. The jumps across the keyboard seemed impossible for her hands. She would leave the practice room with a headache, her fingers aching in a new, deep way. The fear was a constant companion. She had bitten off more than she could chew. She was a waitress pretending to be a pianist, and soon everyone would know. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. She was wrestling with a particularly furious passage, playing it over and over, each time messing it up in a new spot. Frustrated tears of fatigue welled in her eyes. She slammed her hands down on the keys in a discordant crash of sound. Then she just put her head in her hands. The silence of the room after the crash was heavy. In that silence, she heard her grandmother's voice, not as a memory, but as a felt truth. Asterisk, why are you fighting it, child? You're trying to conquer it. You have to dance with it. Asterisk, she took a long, shaky breath. She started the passage again, not trying to attack it with force, but trying to find the flow in it, the pulse. She played it slower, listening not just to the notes, but to the spaces between them. She stopped thinking about the competition, about the judges, about proving anything. She just played the music. And slowly, note by note, it began to unlock. That was the rhythm of her days. The mundane routine of work, the intense focus of practice, the slow, patient rebuilding of her confidence, not as a performer, but as a musician. Friday and Saturday nights at the Gilded Glass were her anchor. Her weekend sets were a mix of classical pieces and quieter, lyrical jazz standards. The crowd was different now. Some came specifically to hear her. They listened. The tips in her jar on the piano were generous, often accompanied by little notes of thanks. It was real work, and it fed her both body and soul. It reminded her why she was putting herself through the grueling practice. To connect. Mr. Alden came in every other Saturday, always sitting at his corner table. He never offered praise directly. He'd just give her a slow, considered nod when she finished a piece, which meant more to her than any flowery compliment. The day of the community symphony competition arrived, a bright, cold Saturday morning. The audition was held in a large, sterile hall at the city's Performing Arts Center. Backstage was crowded with other pianists. Most were decades younger than her, clutching folders of music, their faces tight with focused anxiety. They looked like proper music students, with their nice clothes and their teachers fussing over them. Elara, in her simple concert black dress, felt ancient and out of place. Her hands were cold. The familiar knot of fear was back, tighter than ever. She was third to last to play. Watching the others was agony. They were brilliant, flawless, fiery, technically staggering. One young man played a Rachmaninoff piece with a speed and power that made her feel like a beginner. The hope that had been building in her for weeks began to leak away, replaced by a hollow dread. She had been foolish. This was their world, not hers. When her name was called, her legs felt like wood. She walked onto the big, empty stage. The piano was a magnificent concert grand. A panel of 3 judges sat in the middle of the vast, empty auditorium, their faces impossible to read in the gloom. She sat down. For a terrible second, her mind went blank. She couldn't remember the first note. Then she looked at her hands on the keys. They were waitress hands, strong, capable. They had carried trays and polished glass, and for the last 3 months, they had fought to learn this beautiful, stormy music. They weren't a student's hands. They were a survivor's hands. She thought not of the judges, but of the old man in the corner of the lounge who had given her a chance. She thought of the feel of the gilded glass keys on that first night. She thought of her grandmother. She began to play. It wasn't perfect. About 2 minutes in a complex run, her 4th finger slipped, flubbing a note. A hot jolt of panic shot through her. But instead of freezing, she did what she had learned to do in the practice room. She listened. She stayed inside the music. She danced with it. She let the story of the piece, the Norwegian fjords, the folk melodies, the sweeping romantic storms take over. She wasn't playing for the judges anymore. She was playing for the joy of it, for the struggle of it, for the sheer, improbable fact that she was here, on this stage, at all. When the final, ringing chord faded, the silence in the hall was absolute. She stood, gave a small bow to the dark void where the judges sat, and walked off. Her whole body was trembling. The results were posted an hour later. A small crowd gathered around the list on the bulletin board. Elara hung back, her heart a drum in her throat. She saw the name of the brilliant Rachmaninoff player. First place. Her eyes scanned down. Second place. Another student's name. A cold wash of disappointment started to sink in. It was over. She had tried. She hadn't made it. It was okay. She had her job at the lounge. She had the practice room. It was more than she'd had. Then, at the bottom of the list, under a special heading that read Honorable Mention and Invited Performer, she saw her own name. Invited performer? The symphony conductor, the woman from the cafe, came out of an office and saw her standing there, confused. She walked over, a smile on her face. There you are. Honorable mention is our stuffy way of saying you didn't fit our neat little competition box, she said, her eyes warm. What you played out there wasn't the cleanest thing I've ever heard, but it was one of the most musical. It had heart. And that's what an orchestra needs to connect with. She handed Alara a letter. We'd like to invite you to be the featured soloist in our Spring Pops concert. It's a lighter program. You'd play a shorter, showpiece concerto. And, she added, it comes with a small stipend. It wasn't the grand prize. It wasn't the Grieg in the fall. But it was a stage. With an orchestra. It was real. That night, she played her set at the Gilded Glass. Mr. Alden was there. When she took a break and came to his table, he didn't ask about the competition. He simply said, You played the Schumann with a new depth tonight. You've been working. I got an honorable mention, she told him, the words still feeling strange. And they asked me to play with them in the spring. He took a slow sip of his scotch. A deep satisfaction settled in his eyes, the look of a gardener who sees a long dormant bulb finally pushed through the soil. I know, he said simply. The conductor called me. She was quite excited. He set his glass down. The first door is always the hardest to walk through, Ilara. You've done that. Now the corridor is open. Just keep walking. At the end of her shift, as she was putting her coat on in the back alley, the manager, Mark, came out. He handed her an envelope. Your performing fee, he said. Then he hesitated. I got a call from a local magazine. They want to do a feature. The Cocktail Pianist with the Concert Hall Dream. Is that okay with you? She took the envelope. It felt solid. Yes, she said. That's okay. She walked to the bus stop, the city lights gleaming around her. The nervous buzz was still there, the fear of the new path, of the expectations. But it was quieter now, woven through with a new thread, a steady, quiet certainty. She was no longer the waitress who played piano. She was the pianist who worked as a waitress. The difference was everything. The mountain was still there, and there were many more climbs ahead. But she had her first summit in sight. She had a map. She had her strong, capable hands. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she knew exactly who she was. She was a musician, and her song was just beginning.